Dr Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The amount of money local government authorities have, such as Surrey County Council and the new East Surrey and West Surrey unitaries, has a huge impact on day-to-day impact on residents. It determines the provision of services, protection of our communities, and is essential to the many businesses and voluntary organisations through both policy and the many direct contacts held with local service providers. We heard again this week claims that the government is boosting funding for councils, but the reality doesn't live up to the rhetoric. Surrey County Council's budget is being reduced by over £50 million for the next financial year, negatively impacting Surrey more than any other area, despite increased demand and escalating costs just to maintain existing service levels. The government's calculations simply do not provide enough money for statutory services such as adult social care provision, and we all know the urgent need for action to improve the special educational needs system and support available for children, schools and families. But instead of investing in services, the government is slashing central grant funding for Surrey. Now, despite this, Surrey County Council have managed to put forward a balanced budget thanks to the hard work led by Councillor David Lewis. But the situation as it stands is unsustainable and the risks are mounting. The government needs to act. And in addition to the counterproductive funding decisions being made by the government, we have the added complication of local government reform. Changing the structures of local authorities is a complicated matter. It requires changes in contracts, staffing, locations, and every other aspect of running a large and complicated organisation. And yet, we have no information on how this transition will be funded. It cannot possibly come from existing budgets, given the situation outlined above, if services are to be maintained. There's no clarity on what will happen to staff during this transition. Many jobs are at risk. Some have already sought new, more stable opportunities elsewhere. All face additional pressures as a result of reorganisation, and the risk is important decisions will be delayed, leaving Surrey stuck in stasis. And beyond transition, we must look at the foundation of the new unitaries themselves. We all know the concerns over local authority debt. Some councils, such as Runnymede, that covers part of my constituency, a big chunk of my constituency, were able to operate a commercial strategy with sound financial management, meaning the risk of high debt was mitigated by clear controls and revenue provisions. But this is an exception. Too many other local authorities have borrowed heavily without the knowledge or systems to manage the risk, none more disastrously so than Woking. Woking's failures are unparalleled for the size of the authority, both in terms of scale of debt and failure of financial management and scrutiny. Yet despite announcements that the government is proceeding with local government reform, there is still no clear plan what to do with the Woking debt. In October last year, the government announced debt relief, totalling £500 million in 26 and 27 to assist Woking's debt recovery. But this still leaves over £1.5 billion of debt, which, under the government plans, may shortly become the liability of residents across West Surrey.
On that point, I wonder if the
I pledge to give way to my honourable friend from Surrey Heath.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's giving an excellent speech that I think really draws out the pressures that his residents and mine, and indeed the honourable gentleman for Farnham and Borden face. West Surrey Unitary Authority as a whole faces the prospect of beginning its life on day one with £4.5 billion worth of debt. And the honourable gentleman raised a very important point about the vital public services that need to be paid for. My residents, and I'm sure his are as well, are concerned that when West Surrey comes into existence, those public services could falter and fail on day one. I wonder, through the honourable gentleman, could I ask the Minister what reassurance we can have that that won't happen and that some kind of financial package will be offered to my residents and his?
I thank him for the intervention. I have to know about amused. It sounded more like an intervention from on the Minister rather than me, but I hope it gives the Minister time to prepare for what I also suspect is an inevitable question that I hope she addresses in the winding up. Very happy to.
Thanks, the honourable gentleman, for giving way. And from Surrey to Staffordshire, there is some concern in my part of the world, in Newcastle and Lyme, about what a potential new unitary may look like and what that impact on the debt that a current council may have, and if a new unitary is formed, that debt's carried over. So I just want to add my concerns to his. This isn't a party political issue. This is about making sure that people are not being forced to take up or pay the bill for debt that others have brought together.
I thank the honourable member opposite from Newcastle and Lyme for his intervention, and he's exactly right. This is an issue that affects all areas when it comes to local government reform, when it comes to debt and other commitments which are in neighbouring authorities. And it actually brings me precisely onto the point I was about to make, which it's really not fair that my constituents in Runnymede could have to pay for the failed decisions of woking politicians, both those in power and those who failed in their duty to scrutinise decisions, all of whom they never got to vote for. The scale of the remaining debt, when combined with other local authorities, means that the new West Surrey unitary will be bankrupt from day one. New local authorities should be established on a sound and equal footing, so provision of services can be determined by local need. The government needs to urgently put forward a sound long-term financial plan for both unitaries, East and West, in Surrey.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Pleasure to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for a very impassioned and powerful speech on this matter, which I wholeheartedly agree. I think he's being somewhat polite by the way he describes what this unitary authority is going to be. Essentially, if it is saddled with the debt from Woking and a number of other boroughs, it will essentially be stillborn from the start. And residents in my areas in Farnham, Hazelmere and the other Surrey villages that I represent will be worse off because of it. Does he not agree with me that the government must write off that legacy debt, or at very least ring-fence it, so that our constituents don't face the penalties for the problems and, to be frank, the absolute mess that was left by other boroughs and their politicians?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's a lot more harder in his language in terms of this issue, and I very much respect him for that. At the very least, I think that we need to have a well thought out plan and strategy in terms of what is going to happen with this block of debt. There's a variety of different options in terms of how it can be managed and how it can be dealt with. What I think is a fundamental problem, and my constituents raising me, and my constituents are really worried about, service providers, be it charities and businesses, are really concerned about, is that decisions which have been made in a neighbouring local authority, which they have had no involvement, no dealing with, are going to have material impact on them when the West Unitary is being set up. And at the moment, I realise the scale of the debt is a complicated, it's a huge problem to deal with. It's a complicated problem. I don't envy the Minister in terms of coming into this, in terms of trying to find a way through that. What I really wanted to press to her is that we need to have this debate and this discussion around it. I'm glad we've got this forum this afternoon to do so that the West Unitary, but frankly other unitary authorities which are being set up and which there's a problem, can be dealt fairly. We know what's coming down the tracks, and as I say, my residents aren't going to be punished for decisions which have been made in other authorities that they never got the chance to vote for. This is fundamentally unfair. And I consider, my constituent. By the way, this isn't something which, in some ways, we're not unused to in my part of Surrey, because we sit in the penumbra, just on the outskirts outside of London, and there are plenty of policies that come from the Mayor of London, this awful Mayor of London, which affect us in a whole range of negative ways, and that we don't have the ability to vote for. So unfortunately, I think this is far and away the most substantial, and that there is just so much fear and concern and uncertainties in terms of what's going back down, what could be what we expect to be coming down the track. Now, of course, there's a huge irony in all this, because Surrey is one of the largest contributors to the exchequer in our country. Cutting local authority funding, impacting services, and many contracts local authorities maintain risks serious harm, not only locally in Surrey, but to the national economy. For example, if the government doesn't effectively fund local highways, it will lead to deteriorating road conditions, resulting in more temporary, emergency repair works. We all know the nightmare that causes, which causes delays, costs millions in lost work hours, missed appointments, longer transit times for good, which damages the Surrey economy and by virtue damages the national economy. If the government doesn't effectively fund adult social care, it will cause bed blocking in the hospitals, pressure on health services, impeding effective recovery and care. If the government doesn't effectively fund planning services, it means to lengthy delays in assessing applications for home and businesses, but crucially, risks enabling rogue development, which blights Surrey and other areas. While planning enforcement remains a discretionary service, there is a real risk that this is increasingly seen as a nice-to-have, not essential tool to protect communities, and evidence shows that enforcement rates continue to fall in face of funding pressures, inappropriate development, illegal development, people essentially cocking a snoot at the planning system and building in my constituency and places across the country is a serious problem. Rightly so, my local residents when it happens, are absolutely incensed, and critical to trying to stop this and turning it around is not only stronger powers around enforcement, something I've been campaigning on for years now, but is making sure at the very least we have the resources to do proper planning enforcement. Happy to give way.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving away again. In his area, perhaps as in mine, we've had increased housing targets of up to 150% as a consequence of this government's decision, and I understand their commitment to house building. But that also opens up the floodgates to opportunistic development that is unplanned, and that actually requires incredible expertise in planning departments to ensure that it's appropriate and is then enforced. Those are exactly the kind of services that risk being cut back at just the time that they face the greatest pressure. So does the Honourable Gentleman again agree with me that we need to have some kind of financial resolution to ensure that these services are continued into the future?
Thank you very much for bringing up the issue about housing targets and planning in terms of local authorities. So my constituency covers the majority of the Runnymede local authority, and I think it's roughly around a third of the Elmbridge local authority. In the Runnymede authority, there is a local plan, so there is no risk of the opportunistic development the member mentions. In the Elmbridge local authority, there isn't a local plan, and so there is opportunistic development. There's applications going in the way which are causing huge amounts of concern to local residents in the Cobham Downside, Stoke Devon and Knockshott area in particular. And in fact, just at the end of last year, I wrote to the Secretary of State along with councillors from Elmbridge to raise our concerns about the fact that because of local government reorganisation, again, Surrey has found itself stuck in stasis. There is no local plan in Elmbridge. Can that be put together by the time we hit the election of the shadow authorities? I mean, awful name when you think about it in terms of how you're sort of setting things up for, when we're knocking on doors asking for support for the shadow authorities. But, but how are they, what are Elmbridge to do? Do my constituents living in the Elmbridge part of my constituency effectively have to wait a year and a half before we have the full authority going when the shadow authority transfers over, before we can have some sensible progress when it comes to getting plans in place so that we can protect people from opportunistic development? And that's before we even talk about the scale of the housing targets, which are sort of disproportionate in terms of Elmbridge, how that's spread. and the question I'm going to ask the Minister a bit later in terms of the absence of a commitment for a Surrey Mayor who would be responsible in part in terms of planning decisions. I mean, I hope members can see from the conversation, it's all a bit of a mess, really in terms of where we're at, and it's my constituents who are and local businesses who are stuck in the middle of it. And in fact, perhaps none more sensitive or concerned, or more, there's no topic which I think was more sensitive and concerning is the issue in terms of where we find ourselves with special educational needs provision. We all know the impact of what happens when this isn't fully funded. It's obviously a national issue, but I must say I would really like to welcome the work the County Council has been doing under Councillor Jonathan Huddy to improve transparency and engagement locally, and really turning the dial in terms of what's happening for families and children with special educational needs. But ultimately what's needed is national changes to services and support and the funding to bring forward delivery. And without the local funding, the opportunities for children to reach their full potentials are limited. It causes something, a term which is coined failure demand, which is when services don't provide what's needed early on, and you end up creating more demand in the system later on, really harming and limiting children, notwithstanding all the pressures on families and siblings, and the schools who are going above and beyond to try and support them. The government knows these risks. I know the Minister knows and appreciates these risks. I hope they also know it's a false economy to cut costs right now. And the resulting economic and social impact of not funding these essential services will really be calamitous locally. Now, of course, as night follows day, I fully expect the government benches and others will see this as an opportunity to blame the Conservative government. And of course, I totally acknowledge that local government has struggled as a result of difficult financial decisions over the years. But there really is no more capacity for cuts, which is why we need to address this now. And I want to use this debate as a plea to move beyond any sort of blame game and political posturing, and to work together to address the real risks that we face and establish a sound financial basis for effective local authority finances. Given the clear risks, more than anything else, we now need certainty. Residents and businesses need to know that they will not be shackled with high costs resulting from other local authorities' poor financial management. Businesses and charities who have contracts and partnerships need certainty over their future. And we all need to know that there will be adequate funding so we all will retain access to essential services local authorities provide. This can't wait until after the May elections. Our voters need to know what authorities they are voting councillors to, clarity over the scope of the powers of the authorities. And this is the Minister's opportunity to answer 1.5 million Surrey resident questions. How will local authority debt be dealt with? Will central government ensure effective funding, or do ministers intend to rely on constant tax rises despite the cost of living pressures? These are council tax rises, these are taxes on working people, as she would, the government I assume would define it. Will we have a merit, and if so, can we have the details? And how can we prevent the long-term risks if government continues to prioritise short-term funding cuts? For once, just for once, would this government put Surrey first?
Yeah.